The House is in the last series of votes for the day. Members voting on amendments to H.R. 1230, supporting leases to drill oil off the coast of Virginia and in the Gulf of Mexico. Members right now voting on an amendment ensuring that oil leases would not harm naval operations off the coast of Virginia. After that, we expect a procedural vote and then a vote on final passage of H.R. 1230. Again, President Obama is in New York this afternoon at a wreath-laying ceremony at Ground Zero in New York. And as members are conducting votes this afternoon here in the House and over in the Senate, it's important to note that many members from New York are not in the House or the Senate this afternoon as they are attending those services in New York at Ground Zero. You can see that live, by the way, on our companion network, C-SPAN 3.
Yeas are 175. The nays are 240.
Clyburn. Mr. Clyburn votes aye.
All right, close, Kevin.
On this vote, the yeas are 176 and the nays are 240. The amendment is not adopted. There being no further amendments, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 1230, and pursuant to House Resolution 245, I report the bill back to the House.
The Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 1230 and pursuant to House Resolution 245 reports the bill back to the House under the rule. The previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Bill to require the Secretary of the Interior to conduct certain offshore oil and gas lease sales and for other purposes.
Mr. Speaker.
The House will be in order. Sorry.
Mr.
Purpose
Speaker.
is the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition.
I have a motion to recommit it to
The
desk.
gentleman opposed to the bill.
I am opposed in its current form.
Gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Lujan of New Mexico moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 1230, to the Committee on Natural Resources with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Page 5, after line 14, insert the following and redesignate accordingly. Section 5, no foreign sales. The leases offered for sale under this Act shall specify that all oil and natural gas produced under such leases shall be offered for sale only in the United States.
Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman from from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I reserve a point of order on the motion to recommit.
Point of order. The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman's correct. House will be in order. Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, American families are hurting right now. When the cost of gas at the pump rises, that means that the cost of groceries goes up, the cost of goods goes up, and the cost of just getting to work goes up. The American people need relief, and the way this legislation is written, it will do nothing to decrease the price at the pump and will do nothing to lower the international price of oil. All day today, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have suggested that drilling more is the solution to high gas prices. And if my Republican colleagues really believe, Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman is correct. Gentleman will proceed.
And if my Republican colleagues really believe that increasing drilling in the U.S. will lower gas prices, then we should all be able to agree that oil produced in America should stay in America to help American families and American businesses. And that's why I'm offering this final amendment today, to ensure that oil resources that are produced through leasing under this Act are kept here and sold here in the United States. Simply put, this means if we produce it here, we should keep it here for the American people. Mr. Speaker, I come from a state that has oil and gas production, and we know how important domestic production is. We don't disagree that production in the United States is important. Personally, I favor a more comprehensive approach, a plan to reduce our dependence on foreign sources of oil, one that includes natural gas, wind, solar, one that grows new industries and creates jobs that cannot be outsourced out of the United States. And while I disagree with my Republican colleagues' approach, I think that we can all agree that something must be done to reduce the price of gasoline for consumers. The American people want us to work together to lower gas prices, plain and simple. They know our country is far too reliant on foreign oil, and they want us to do something real about it, plain and simple. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The gentleman is correct.
Mr. Speaker, some things just deserve to be repeated, and I'll tell you. The American people want us to come together to lower gas prices, plain and simple. And at a time when gas prices are at historic highs, if we're going to produce more from American drilling, we should keep it in America to help Americans. We've heard from the other side that the solution is as simple as producing more oil in the U.S. But that's not going to lower costs in the international markets. That's not how it works. Mr. Speaker, U.S. domestic production is already at its highest level in almost a decade, and that's a fact. In the last 2 years, oil production from the U.S. Outer Continental Shelf has increased by more than a third, and that's a fact. So while we've seen our domestic production going up, the price at the pump is going up even higher, and that's hurting families. Without this amendment, there is nothing in the Republican bill that would guarantee that oil produced under this act would stay in the United States to offer relief for the American people. But, Mr. Speaker, we can change all of that, and we can do it together. Do what's right for the American people. And support this amendment that simply says that oil produced in the United States under these leases would stay in the United States. My Republican colleagues will tell us that this bill is about sending a message to OPEC and to the world that we are willing to produce our own oil. If we're going to send a message, Mr. Speaker, let's send the message that when we drill on the taxpayers' land, that America's oil should stay right here in America to lower prices at the pump, plain and simple. To my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, and I hope we can have a little order. To my colleagues, when you go home to your district this weekend, ask your constituents if they think oil produced in the U.S. should be kept in the U.S. and refined in the U.S. for American consumers, American families, and American businesses, or if they think it should be shipped out of the country. What do you think they'll say? Quite simply, that is the choice, and that is all this final amendment says. It will not kill this bill. If it's adopted, it will be immediately incorporated into the underlying bill, and the bill will be voted upon immediately. Let's do something for the American people. And plain and simple, let's support this amendment. I urge my colleagues to vote yes. I yield back my time.
Chair would remind the membership to address their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my reservation.
The gentleman withdraws his motion. Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
And I rise in opposition to the motion.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I oppose this motion to recommit. Quite frankly, this amendment is redundant, unnecessary, and another attempt to divert attention from the real issue of increasing energy production in order to create jobs, lower energy costs, and improve national security by lessening our dependence on foreign oil. First, Mr. Speaker, exports are already subject to the Export Administration Act. Before any oil or gas can be exported, the President must find that the exports will not diminish the total quantity or quality of petroleum available to the U.S. and the national interests and are in accord with the provisions of the Export Administration Act of 1969. If the President finds that exports are in violation of the Export Administration Act, an executive order can halt all these exports if Congress finds that the exports are in conflict with the national interests. If it can pass, and they can act accordingly. Now, having said it is covered under law, let's really get to the bottom line. This is another distraction from the same people that brought us cap and trade. Now, that should probably say everything right there, because I find it absolutely ironic, my good friend from New Mexico making this argument that if we went out and talked to our constituents, if they'd like to buy American-made energy, he suggested they'd say overwhelmingly yes. Well, of course they would. And they'd also say, why aren't we drilling for sources here in the United States? Offshore, in the Gulf of Mexico, and onshore. And that's what these 3 bills do. So I urge my colleagues to vote against this motion to recommit and pass the bill. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back without objection. The previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes
Mr. Speaker,
have it.
recorded vote, please.
Gentleman from New Mexico requests a recorded vote. Recorded vote is requested. All in favor will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. Recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20. The chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote in question of passage of the bill.
The House voting on a procedural motion related to H.R. 1230, legislation supporting leases to drill oil off the coast of Virginia and in the Gulf of Mexico. Bill supporters believe this legislation would ultimately create jobs and lower gas prices. Those who are opposed believe approval would mean higher taxes, handouts to the oil industry, and damage to the environment. This is a 15-minute vote on the procedural motion. After this, we expect a vote on final passage, which would wrap up work for the week in the House. Next week, we expect the House to take up general debate on a related bill, H.R. 1229. That measure would speed the oil drilling lease approval process. We understand the House is scheduled to take that up next Tuesday. Votes are expected to go no later than 3 o'clock this afternoon. These would be the last votes for the week in the House. The House is voting on a procedural motion related to H.R. 1230, legislation supporting leases to drill oil off the coast of Virginia and in the Gulf of Mexico. Votes on final passage expected to follow. Earlier today, Vice President Biden led bipartisan talks on the budget at Blair House, which is right across the street from the White House. The Hill has a follow-up story about it. Biden's gang to meet again on Tuesday. This is from Michael O'Brien of The Hill. The new round of budgetary negotiations led by Vice President Joe Biden will resume on Tuesday, Vice President said. He issued a short statement after a meeting at Blair House with bipartisan congressional leaders intended to begin negotiations toward a comprehensive agreement on the nation's spending and debt. On behalf of all of us, let me say, we had a good, productive first meeting. The Vice President said, we plan to meet again on Tuesday and look forward to further discussions on these important challenges. The talks included House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, Senate Minority Whip Jon Kyl, representing Republicans, and representing Democrats were Senate Finance Committee Chair Max Baucus, Senate Appropriations Chair Daniel Inouye, Assistant House Minority Leader James Clyburn, and House Budget Committee Ranking Member Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Once again, you can read more about this at thehill.com.
On this vote, the yeas are 171, the nays are 238. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Washington.
I ask for the ayes and nays.
The gentleman has requested a recorded vote. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote. This is a 5-minute vote.
The House is voting on final passage of H.R. 1230. It's the first of two related measures that support leases to drill oil off the coast of Virginia and in the Gulf of Mexico. The other bill, H.R. 1229, will be debated next Tuesday. While this vote is underway, we'll get more on these two bills. A short time ago, we spoke with a Capitol Hill reporter. Ben Geeman of The Hill, thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thanks for having me on.
Can you tell us what's at the heart of these two bills, these oil and gas bills? What are they all about?
Well, these two bills reflect very widespread claims by Republicans and to be fair, Democrats from some sort of pro areas where you have a lot of drilling, that essentially the administration is bottling up and not allowing access to domestic energy production. And so these bills are part of a kind of three-bill package from the Republicans, and the one that's up on the floor today would essentially set some deadlines for the administration to conduct some offshore lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico, where oil and gas drilling is already allowed, and it would also require the sale of oil and gas leases off the coast of Virginia. Now, that's something that the administration had sort of flirted with, but then in the wake of the BP spill, the administration backed away from plans to allow oil and gas leasing off the coast of some Atlantic states. And so really today you're seeing a lot of kind of cross currents in a big debate that's very much rooted in both high gasoline prices and the high profits that some of the big oil companies, in particular Exxon and Shell, have been reporting. And so what these bills would do would essentially force the administration's hand on allowing greater development. Another bill that's going to be up next week would set some new deadlines for how quickly the administration has to act on drilling permit requests, because you've had widespread complaints from the industry and from Republicans that the drilling permit requests have been slow-walked. Now, the flip side of that is the administration is saying, and Democrats are saying, that what these measures would do would essentially be allowing drilling to go forward as if the BP spill had never happened, and that essentially by creating all these new deadlines that would kind of shortchange some of the environmental reviews that need to be done and some of the safety reviews that need to be done to ensure that drilling proceeds without such, in a way that lessens risks of such a catastrophic spill occurring again.
So now, during debate, we've heard Republicans say, bottom line, these measures would help reduce gas prices at the pump. How would that happen?
Well, that's a pretty controversial claim, quite frankly. It depends what timeline you're looking at. These are, when you're talking about offshore drilling, you're talking about some pretty big projects and expensive projects and complicated projects, especially as the industry has gone into deeper and deeper waters. So, it's given that even when you start a project, it's going to be quite some time until that exploration or even that development project starts to yield new oil supplies. It's unlikely that there would be any type of immediate effect on gasoline prices. That said, you've heard an argument increasingly advanced from the Republicans that says, look, even though it might be some time before this would bring any type of new supplies onto the market, their view is that by sort of signaling that help is on the way, I suppose, that there is going to be more domestic supply developed, that this would essentially send a signal of sorts to traders that would sort of, in the nearer term, in fact, start to affect prices, not necessarily because there's new supply coming online, but rather because if you sort of look at the market psychology, when traders feel like there's more supplies on the way, in a sense, that would sort of tamp down on some of the fear that unrest in the Middle East and other problems are going to lead to longer-term shortages.
Just a couple of seconds left. Has Energy Secretary Stephen Chu commented on either of these measures? And if so, what's he saying about the proposed changes in policy?
Well, it's actually the Interior Department that controls offshore oil and gas drilling and leasing decisions. And Interior Secretary Ken Salazar has spoken out very strongly about these measures. He told reporters at a press conference a couple weeks ago in advance of the one-year anniversary of the BP disaster, he said, look, these GOP bills reflect what he called an amnesia about the offshore catastrophe last year. He says it's essentially requiring, leasing and production and development to go ahead in a way that, is not sufficiently mindful of the need for greater acknowledgement of safety and so forth, given what happened last year with the Deepwater Horizon rig.
Any comments from oil company executives about the bills?
Well, the industry is very supportive of measures that would allow both wider access, but also have the Interior Department speed up what they say is an overly cumbersome and time-consuming process for drilling permits. What you're hearing the industry saying is, look, we have taken a great number of steps in the wake of the spill to enhance the safety of our projects, and they've launched this new sort of offshore drilling safety institute. But their view is also that, they can go forward in a way that's very mindful of safety, but without taking as much time as the Interior Department has been taking to get these permits out the door.
Ben Geeman of The Hill, we thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And
in a story from CQ today, White House withholds veto threat on GOP drilling bills. by Jeff Koss. The White House objected today to a pair of Republican bills that would expedite offshore drilling, but stopped short of issuing an explicit veto threat. Those bills would undercut new safety and environmental requirements implemented by the Interior Department in response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Those reforms strengthen requirements for issues ranging from well-design to workplace safety to corporate accountability. You can read more in this article at CQ.com.
266. The nays are 149. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to recommit is laid upon the table. Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. I hereby give notice of my resignation from the United States House of Representatives effective Monday, May 9, 2011 at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Included is a copy of the letter I submitted to Governor Brian Sandoval. Serving Nevada's 2nd Congressional District has been one of the greatest honors of my life. No state has been harder hit by the recession than Nevada. My state has the unfortunate distinction of leading the nation in unemployment, foreclosures, and bankruptcy. There is no question that our nation needs to change the way we do business if we are going to get our economy back on track. It has been a privilege to join my House colleagues in the fight to restore fiscal responsibility to Washington and work towards a more prosperous future for our great nation. I look forward to continuing our important work in the United States Senate. Signed sincerely, Dean Heller, Member of Congress.
From Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to have my name removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 1081.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns to meet at noon tomorrow, and further, when the House adjourns on that day, it adjourns to meet at noon on Tuesday, May 10, 2011, for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. Pursuant to 20
for legislative business.
Without objection. Pursuant to 22 U.S.C. 276H in the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair announces the Speaker's appointment of the following member of the House to the Mexico-United States Interparliamentary Group.
Mr. Pastor of Arizona.
Chair is prepared to entertain 1-minute requests. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as we have appropriately celebrated the successful mission to take out Osama bin Laden, there has been one discordant note sounded in the halls of Congress, and that is, with the testimony of the Attorney General of the United States, there still is a reluctance on the part of this administration to recognize the major contribution made to this country by those who were involved in enhanced interrogation techniques, which resulted in part of the information, the intelligence information that allowed us to find Osama bin Laden. The reason I bring this up is this administration has said in the past that certain types of enhanced interrogation techniques equaled torture. I do not believe that to be true, and for that to remain on the record subjects those men and women who have done a tremendous job for this country, which has resulted in one of the successful missions, in addition to other missions that have taken place in our war against terror, subjects them to the cloud of prosecution in the future and the accusation that they involve themselves in forms of conduct that would be defined as torture by some of the highest officials in the United States. That is something that we cannot allow to happen. When we had the CIA director indicate that we did receive information as a result of some of these activities, it seems to me that we are duty-bound to clear up the record and to thank those men and women, not condemn them.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition? From Texas, seek recognition. Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Texas is burning. Since November, Texas has experienced over 9,000 wildfires that have burned over 2 million acres and destroyed more than 400 homes and several thousand structures. These fires continue to rage, threatening the lives and property of Texans. The state of Texas and local governments, along with our firefighters and our other first responders, have done a magnificent job of responding to the threats of these wildfires. However, the resources of the state and the local government have been stretched responding to fires we've already had, and the threats of wildfires continue. Without additional assistance, the capacity to respond to future wildfires will be greatly diminished. That is why Governor Perry requested a major disaster declaration and federal disaster assistance. Unfortunately, President Obama denied this request. Mr. Speaker, many in Texas and in my district can't seem to understand the President's decision. Governor Perry intends to appeal the President's decision, and I hope the President will consider. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to bring everyone's attention to the extraordinarily destructive storms that have raged throughout the South, and particularly in my home state of Arkansas. In my home state, we've seen flooding and tornado damage wreak havoc on local communities. We've seen the lives of our loved ones tragically taken before their time. Last week, I personally surveyed the damage in central Arkansas in my district. In the little town of Valonia, a town north of Little Rock, 70 homes were destroyed and an additional 50 were damaged. I toured Little Rock Air Force Base and saw the damage to structures there and the damage to our C-130s that are so important to our national security. In Hot Springs Village, I saw the damage left in the wake of the latest round of storms that claimed the life of an 8-month-old boy there. He's one of the 22 Arkansans killed by the storms in April. I ask my colleagues and all Americans listening today to keep the families affected by this tragedy in their thoughts and prayers. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the President sought to take out America's most wanted and dangerous enemy, he called on an elite team of the United States Navy to execute the mission. The 10th District of Illinois is home to an important Navy base. The Naval Station Great Lakes is the first stop of every single naval recruit. It is likely that those who executed the mission in Pakistan on Sunday started their training at this base. Today I want to recognize those who got the job done and the outstanding training provided at Naval Station Great Lakes. I applaud the continued heroic efforts of our armed forces and intelligence personnel, and particularly those who, under the cover of a dark Pakistan night, dropped into a fortified compound to give justice to millions of people around the world. Mr. Speaker, our fight against those who want to destroy democracies around the world continues. But today we can press ahead, as confident as ever in our nation's ability to confront and triumph over evil. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this week marks the Holocaust Days of